I'm Ben Howe, and this is SEO in 2025.
And what's your number one SEO tip for 2025?
My number one SEO tip for 2025 is to not be put off by ChatGPT horror stories, but in fact, embrace generative AI at scale for your SEO output. But crucially, do it smartly and do it methodically.
So what are the horror stories?
Well, LinkedIn is awash with horror stories around folk who jumped on generative AI quite early, were early adopters of it, and perhaps used it to create content at scale, who've since been hit with helpful content updates and otherwise they've just disappeared from search results entirely through algorithmic penalties or just changes in algorithms and which are better able to recognize machine-generated content.
And is this, do you think, websites that are actually using vast swathes of AI, hundreds of thousands of pages perhaps, or is this people with genuine intent perhaps just using it a little bit, a relative little bit, maybe 20, 30, 40 pages in their site, but they're still getting hammered for it?
I think the examples that perhaps if SEO is over LinkedIn and part of that community, the types of examples that are shared most often are people who've deliberately tried to game the system by generating huge amounts of automated content. And by being early adopters, perhaps they weren't necessarily doing it very smartly. And it now, in retrospect, although they were being early adopters and trying out a new technology, retrospectively, it looks like it wasn't the right thing to do. There may well be much more innocent, much more small-scale cases, but perhaps those people aren't in the SEO community because they're not doing it in a way that is deliberately trying to monetize SEO.
So it's not necessarily the scale. It could actually be simply the way it's done. You do, from your opening statement, advocate doing it at scale, but doing it at scale correctly, I guess. So what does doing it at scale correctly look like?
Well, I think my advice is to be smart and to prime generative AI in a sensible way that adds value. So, for example, where a lot of people who were early adopters of the technology and using it to create content at scale went wrong, in my opinion, is using simple prompts, giving too much freedom to AI. Now, the way that I would advocate doing it and the way that I've found to be successful has involved really priming generative AI in advance. So, for example, using a crawler to extract elements of websites, and then using an AI to extract from bulk scraping relevant bits of information, relevant facts, value that's hard to find elsewhere, and then having a second AI generate fresh content out of material that you've primed it to extract. So the difference to highlight is that you're not just asking generative AI to produce something out of nowhere. You're using your technical SEO expertise to scrape information and then have AI extract only what's relevant, only what you want it to draw on, and then have a second AI produce information from that. So this gives us as SEOs much more control over the inputs that generative AI will draw on. So it allows us to ensure the quality of information, ensure the accuracy of information. It allows us to have much tighter control over content structure. So all round, it's a human curated input, but without the human hours put into it. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'd like to delve deeper into it, if that's okay. I mean, starting off with perhaps the crawling, the scraping of the initial data. You were talking about perhaps a site or perhaps some other resource that wasn't necessarily accessible on the web, I guess. So are you talking about maybe PDFs that have been produced by a company beforehand that haven't been accessible to the general public, and asking AI to perhaps summarize and make sense of that initially?
It can be, but it can also be the case that there are publicly available data sets that folk have not previously found it easy to extract information from. I could give an example. An example content format that this process works really well for is comparison type content. So if you are retailing vehicles, cars, for example, there are data sets out there that are product spec sheets, right? And previously, you might use a search engine crawler to extract certain parts of information on a page, but it's fiddly because if a page template changes, you can't extract the information very well. You spend a lot of time troubleshooting. There's user error. So users will input the incorrect information in the first place, which makes your extraction less worthwhile. There are two ways that I've suggested using AI, and one of these is to extract information in the first place. So practically, if you're doing comparison content for something like two motor vehicles that you want to produce editorial for comparing the two vehicles, you would use an off-the-shelf SEO crawler to extract broadly all content in the body of a page. And then you would prime AI to extract the bits of information from within this greater body that are most useful to you. So for example, engine size, color, year. You can train AI to recognize what certain bits of information are, right? So you can train AI to recognize an engine format looks like this, a year format looks like this, extract these bits of information from the page. And before you know it, you can accumulate a data set from numerous different data sets and use AI to extract those bits of information. And then before you know it, you've accumulated a unique combination of information from multiple different sources, and you've had tight control over that input. So if you then use a second AI to generate a piece of content in a prescribed format using only that information you've primed a previous AI with, you can have a guarantee that information is of high quality, is of a prescribed structure, and overall a much more successful output than early adopters of generative AI would have done for content production, for example, which would have been drawn on nothing in particular.
Great example, thank you. So it would be good to understand actually why you're talking about using multiple AIs, so using a second AI to write the piece of content after the initial AI has collated the data set. So why do you need multiple AIs there? And is there any particular AI that you're favoring for both tasks at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So it's a very good question. So at SEOMG, we've just decided to approach it this way because we've got two specialist use cases for OpenAI, and we've trained these two separately. So we've created two AIs using the OpenAI API, which is accessible to anyone for a very small fee. And one is trained on data extraction based on picking out bits of information that follow certain formats that you prompt it. And another one which is actually the harder skill to execute, is trained on editorial in a way according to SEO best practice, given basic, almost universal brand guidelines. So because the purposes of the two use cases for AI are so different, we found it valuable to separate them, decouple them completely. Otherwise, layering on lots of different types of logic and different types of purpose, I think our experience is one AI is less successful at doing two separate things.
Okay, that's great. And you've obviously seen tangible evidence that there's been a significant uptick in quality because of that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think to pick out a key line from what I was saying earlier is it's human curated content. So we as people have defined the types of information that need to go in to this, and we've extracted that type of information. We've organized it in a way that we would do as humans. So everything about it replicates a human-led process. It's just automating the execution of it. And it's much more valuable, much more authentic than if you simply prompt a generative AI to write a piece of information for you.
So Where does this fit into a content marketing strategy, and how does this impact organizationally? So, i.e., what other roles within the organization need to be involved in these kinds of conversations, and how often do you maybe sit down to decide upon how often you're going to come up with a new project?
Sure, that's a good question. So it is a really good fit for initiatives that are for SEO or for growth. It's less attractive for brand-oriented projects, organizations have a number of reasons for needing to create content or publish landing pages, and not all of them are going to be for growth in the way that SEO material is for growth. It works really well for SEO because you can, if you're doing a project which requires executing a number of pieces in a small number of formats, because you can, as I said, you if you want to extract common bits of information and use common bits of information across a huge number of different pieces, that AI extraction is really efficient and really effective. But if you're doing brand-led content and you maybe don't need to create dozens or hundreds or thousands of pieces of output that follow the same format, it's probably less effective, just because of the time savings are. The more customized the brand-led content project, the less value there is in introducing these automations. To answer the question more succinctly, it's very attractive for at-scale growth-led projects, which can be template-based. And so we would encourage stakeholders to help us define what kind of data points might be useful, what kind of insights we might want to provide early on. For brand-led types of content, we probably wouldn't involve stakeholders in the production of this. Or in fact, we probably wouldn't advocate using this particular technology.
How do you actually decide upon the type of content that you're going to produce for a brand? Because the possibilities are always limitless nowadays in terms of what you could target, and I guess the ease at producing content is so much better than it used to be.
Yeah.
So it can be easy just to fall on the bandwagon of just producing as much as possible, because that's not really necessarily the best thing to do from a quality perspective. So, I mean, how do you be selective, and how do you know what to select?
Well, for an initiative that this type of technology can support, it's important to not just look at the traditional things like search volume. It's more important than ever to look at the types of material that search engines are favoring. I think in my personal experiences, it's never been easier to see what type of material is likely to rank if you properly examine search results. In the past, even as recently as perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, I've found it search engines would provide a more of a variety of types of material for a given search result, versus now I think it's a little bit more monolithic.
Is there software you use to analyze the SERP and determine what is likely to be a most successful style of content?
A number of different tools will try and categorize a query as, this is informational, this is just navigational, there's purchase intent behind this, and that can give you inferences on what format of content you ought to be producing, and then by extension, whether you can leverage the technology I'm describing here because of the type of format that seems to be rewarded. However, I find all the most popular off-the-shelf tools a little bit hit and miss in this regard. So a typical approach that we would follow would be treat that the categorizations or the intent assumptions of these off-the-shelf tool sets as a starting point, but then validate by some manual checks for some the most valuable keyword formats for your business. And so then by eyeballing that, you can sort of verify, I can see immediately, look, 6 of these results for the top 10 for this query format generally are met with X or Y type of content, and Y type of content is the type that really lends itself to the technology or the automation processes that I'm describing here. So that's the sort of logic tree that we would go through.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time doing what you suggest in 2025?
I think the thing that folks should stop doing is being drawn into busy work. So work that takes a lot of time and might have a high perceived value, but might not affect the bottom line. So one thing that I have to show great discipline with is being really ruthless with which tool alerts I follow up on a daily basis. So as anybody reading this would know, watching this would know, we're subscribed to so many different tool sets to support our SEO efforts. And it's very sensible often to set up notifications for changes, for issues, for opportunities. But my inbox is flooded with these on a daily basis. And if I was to follow up all of these, I would have no time to pursue more innovative tactics like those which I'm describing. So my tip for all SEOs of things to do less of is stop following your notifications and alerts blindly and be really disciplined with what to follow up on versus what to put in a backlog to action in 2 years' time.
Ben Howe is SEO Director and Head of Delivery at SEOMG, and you can find him over at seomg.co.uk. Ben, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2025.
Thank you very much.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2025, the book, over at seoin2025.com.